Hi, welcome to the bathtub, where when you hear this sound effect,
We're so happy that it's your birthday. We hope you have an awesome day.
That's right.
you know, and you see this whiteboard with a special artistically designed logo or whatever is announcement from the Pismo Beach prop department put this together. You know it's a special birthday edition of the bathtub. When we were doing the bathtub years ago, we used to do the bathtub was a daily cartoon show, an afternoon cartoon show for the kids, and people could send in their names of their kids, and we'd announce their birthdays. And we still sort of do that. And someone's asked us to mention Ray Bradbury's 100th birthday, and we thought we'd start the old birthday thing going again, just because it's just as important, especially when a guy's 100 years old. And Ray Bradbury hit his 100th birthday today. He's not been with us for about 9 years. 9 of those years he hasn't been with us, but we feel like he's still here every day. There's a lot of people doing 100th birthday celebrations all over for Ray Bradbury. And being in California during a horrible time in California, the place is burning down, and it's almost a tragedy. It's sad to get up every day to see what a mess is going on. I thought this would be a good time to remember one of our favorite Californians. Ray Bradbury was born in Illinois, Waukegan, Illinois, but he spent most of his life in California and loved California and Southern California. For the week, I've been reading the second volume of the Ray Bradbury biography by Jonathan Eller. I'm really enjoying this. This is by University of Illinois Press, which makes sense since that was his home where he was born, and he still wrote about it much of his life. And I'm enjoying it a great deal. As I said in the previous, we're doing 3 episodes based around the 3 volumes of this really good biography. It's a terrific biography. It basically tells us the places he was when he was writing and the books he was reading and the writers he hung out with. And that's basically all writers do. That's good writers, they don't really do many exciting things. Graham Greene, okay, he was kind of running around meeting people and doing adventurous stuff sometimes. But Ray Bradbury, most writers just sit around the house writing. And this volume is going into the period in the 50s when Ray Bradbury became surprisingly successful for a guy who wrote hundreds of short stories for the pulp science fiction and fantasy magazines. He was in a lot of the same places as published by some of the same editors as H.P. Lovecraft and Arthur C. Clarke, and he was even in Astounding. He wasn't. He was in something. John Campbell published one of his stories, so he was all over the map in terms of genre fiction, and yet he had a certain flavor about his work and an interest in writing that kind of went beyond just genre, and is one of the few SF writers who kind of moved out of it and was accepted by serious writers, quote unquote, and literary writers like Christopher Isherwood and Kingsley Amis, and we talked about a lot of them last week. And he got into the movie business. He worked on this is covering a lot of the movie years with Bradbury, and in some ways, like for many writers, he loved movies. He obviously grew up loving movies and was excited to write films and spent a lot of time working on scripts for like Moby Dick, which it was fairly successful at the time, but it's a really boring movie. It's not Ray Bradbury's fault, but it's just a boring book. My personal feeling. The movie's much better than the book. That's all I will say. And he worked on that, and he worked on some adaptations of his own work. He worked with some great directors. I didn't know he worked with Carol Reed, the great British director, wonderful director. And Graham Greene was another fan of Ray Bradbury's. He was just Bradbury really just appealed to every possible reader, and mainly to readers, people who love to read books. So he's a perfect person to talk about the bathtub, where basically the only purpose we read, all we're looking for in the bathtub is have a good time, and Ray Bradbury has given many of us a lot of great times. I was going to just browse through a few things. I want to cheers to Ray. I mixed the martinis in the floral patterned martini glass a little early today, because we wanted to get this 100th birthday thing up before all the celebrations were finished. I want to thank the Pismo Beach prop department for putting this together. They really outdid themselves with fireworks and multicolored pens. I want to just wander through a bunch of stuff I have of Ray Bradbury's. I didn't really want to talk about any particular book. I'm reading this week in kind of commemoration and memory of Ray Bradbury, one of the books I loved as a kid, which is R is for Rocket. Ray Bradbury published, we talked about some of his earliest books last week, and this, about mid-career, Bradbury did a lot of movies. He was kind of having trouble writing novels. Dandelion Wine is kind of a interesting failure of a book, I always thought. But there's some great passages in it. He was having trouble with writing novels, and then the scripts were kind of keeping him occupied. And there was something about the kind of innocent wonder of his early short stories that he was kind of losing in a way. He was kind of becoming a very serious writer, and he was trying to do a little bit more than just write and sell stories to these magazines. And he challenged himself, and he was successful, and he wasn't always successful. R's for Rocket is one of the books he started to put together in the 60s, and it's mainly kind of a rehash. It's kind of a reissue of some of his earlier stories, a few new stories that hadn't been collected, and they were put together, I think, ostensibly for young adults. So they're published in young adult series. I read these in the school library when I was a miserable kid in junior high school. I hated junior high school. It was a horrible school, but we had a decent library. And I remember sitting in there reading R's for Rocket and S's for Space. And I was like, I guess I was 12 or something when I read Bradbury. I said 14, but it must have been like 11 or 12. And I remember reading through these books. They're supposed to be slightly Bowdlerized for kids. I don't notice it. I don't think there wasn't that much to cut in Bradbury. It does seem to have some of the stories, as kind of a wide range of the stories that he did. A few of the Martian stories, some of the kind of just sort of poetic visions of the dawning space age, after Sputnik, and some of the stories like The End of the Beginning, I believe, which is about a man mowing his lawn and looking up into the sky and seeing the light of the first space station going out. They're almost anachronistic stories now, but they still have a bit of poetry and a great deal of loveliness about them. One of his most famous stories, The Foghorn, is in here, about the creature that comes up from underneath the ocean it's some old dinosaur every year because it hears the sound of a foghorn and it's in love with the foghorn. It thinks it's found another sea creature. It's a lovely little story. It was the one that attracted John Huston, I guess, to hire Bradbury to write Moby Dick, and it's still a lovely story. It also has a story, I haven't read it again, that when I was 12 or 13 called Frost and Fire, which was a long story, a very early story of Bradbury's, which is a little more conventional kind of science fantasy story about a planet where some Earth ship has crashed, and something about the planet makes people age one year every day, or they only live 7 years. It's like 10 years of their life pass every 24 hours. And it's about this young kid who wants to get off the planet before he dies in seven or 8 days. I remember loving that story. He was very much a friend of, we talked about last week, Lee Brack and Edmund Hamilton, who were a couple of Southern California, really interesting popular science fiction writers. And he was also friends. I thought I mentioned a few of the other writers he loved. He was a big fan and a very close friend of Henry Kuttner, a really interesting. He wrote science fiction for almost all of the science fiction magazines, from Astounding to Galaxy, kind of a wide range of stuff. And he was the husband of the great C.L. Moore, Catherine Moore, who I met in an elevator once for 10 seconds. But I think that was kind of cool to have met her. And they were both really interesting writers in the 40s and 50s. Kuttner died much too young, but Bradbury credited him. He really wasn't much older than Bradbury, but Bradbury hung around writers as soon as he started to write, and Kuttner helped him a lot in learning how to write short stories. So we're kind of going through. I want to say a few more last things just to remember about Bradbury. Some of the writers he liked. And I think it's very important. We talk about some of the popular science fiction writers and some of the kind of pulp writers, pulp writers. But Bradbury read right across all across the spectrum of fiction at the time. And one of the writers he loved is one of the writers I loved as a kid, was just W. Somerset Maugham. He particularly loved The Painted Veil, which is one of the few Maugham novels I haven't read. I love Maugham's books. And I reread him as I get older. Cakes and Ale is one of my favorites, and Of Human Bondage, and Moon and Sixpence is one of the great books. But anyway, Maugham, you can sort of see some of the style. We talked about Hemingway last week, and a lot of the style. One of the interesting things about Bradbury is he writes about kind of fantastic landscapes as if they're almost alien landscapes on Earth. And it really makes sense when you think that he really was also a fan of Frederick Prokofiev. Frederick Prokosch is somebody we're going to take into the bathtub someday, eventually, when we find time. I read both of these books over the past 40, 50 years. The Asiatics and The Seven Who Fled, these came out in they were in the 40s and the 50s. These were really popular books. 1935 for The Asiatics. And it's really sort of, if you know Paul Bowles' work, this is a little like Paul Bowles, but a much better writer, I think. I like Paul Bowles, but this is a much better writer. Really kind of haunting, beautiful prose, and you can sort of see the influence on Bradbury. They're basically Westerners going through these kind of East Asian countries, and they're kind of adventures to these kind of alien landscapes to them, and they're beautifully written, and the sense of strangeness as you explore different culture really comes through when you read Bradbury stories about going to Mars and so forth. For fun for today, I thought maybe to commemorate Ray Bradbury, you might watch some Ray Harryhausen. He and Ray Harryhausen were old buddies, and the story The Foghorn, one of Bradbury's most literate and interesting science fiction stories, was transformed into a book called It Came From Beneath the Sea. Really one of those terrible monster movies that scared the crap out of me when I was a little kid. I literally went in the other room. I could not watch it. I was so scared of this giant lizard coming out of the water, and it bit somebody's head off, and I couldn't watch the movie after that. It was based on The Foghorn. It has nothing to do with The Foghorn except the beginning of the story. And Ray Harryhausen does one of his first stop-action animations. He and Bradbury were quite friends, I guess, all their lives. They knew each other as kids. And one of the fun things about this pack, it has 3 movies. It has 3 Million Miles to Earth, Earth versus the Flying Saucers, and It Came From the Sea. This is my British edition of this. I'm pretty sure there's an American edition of this. This is only on Region 2. And I'm trying to think. These all have these tremendous, when they do those director's cuts things, they have some talks and interviews with Ray Bradbury and Ray Harryhausen in here when they're both fairly old men and still quite kind of cool. They're kind of quite cool guys when they were old. I hope I will be this cool as I get older. Anyway, they talk all of this. These are really fun movies, and Ray Harryhausen is still a kick. Finally, I wanted to mention, we talked about Avram Davidson. When I knew Avram as a kid, Ray Bradbury kindly wrote an introduction for one of Avram's collections, Strange Seas and Shores. And you would have thought that Avram was kind of, not cool enough for Ray Bradbury, but he never forgot his roots. He was really the closest to a celebrity you could think of who came out of science fiction. He was always on television. He was hanging out with Charles Laughton and famous writers and movie directors, and he still would have time to write an introduction for Avram's book, which I thought was quite kind of him and quite cool. Got lots of collections of his books here, but I've shown most of those to you. I always think the best way to read Bradbury is in these collections. Any Machineries of Joy and Golden Apples of the Sun. Those stories and the way they kind of mix together are really what his greatest work was. Finally, Fahrenheit 451. I didn't bring my copy of Fahrenheit 451 out of the closet. I liked that book as a kid. It doesn't work for me as I got older. I reread it recently because I was going to write a piece about that horrible, awful movie on HBO last year, 2 years ago. It was a horrible adaptation of Fahrenheit 451. It was just total crap. And it made me go back to watch the old Truffaut film, which when it came out in the late 60s, this got panned everyone just talked about it was the world's worst movie. And I saw it as a kid, and it knocked me out. And I watched it 2 or 3 times last year. It's a beautiful movie. It's one of the best science fiction movies I've ever seen, and certainly one of the best science fiction adaptations. It really gets to the love of books. I think Truffaut brings out the quality of Fahrenheit 451, which is that these people are hoarding these books because they love them. And I think he does that even better than the book in some way. It's a wonderful movie. And if you want to kind of remember that book and you've read it too many times, I really highly recommend this wonderful adaptation. And I also love the way he kind of really gets into these characters. Truffaut's always kind of at the level of the people he's doing the film about. And the special effects are very minimal. And it's a great film. especially if you love the book. So I would recommend that you might do that to remember Ray Bradbury. Anyway, we'll do one more of these eventually. I'll probably put it off for a while, but I want to say happy birthday, Ray Bradbury. You're 100 years old. You don't look at it. You don't look at one bit. You look just like you did when I was 14, when I was 12, or whatever I was when I picked up your books at the Woolworths and the C.L. Grants. I used to go down there and I'd buy these Bantam paperbacks. You look the same as you did that 50 years ago to me. And we hope you have a great day. And happy 100th. We'll be here again in another 100 years for your second 200th birthday. Happy birthday, Ray Bradbury.